Good evening. Jó estét kívánok. My name is Callum Nicholson. I'm the new Director of Research here at the Danube Institute. And today, my first, opportunity to do something with the Danube Institute is introduce this wonderful panel on this new book that's been produced by the Danube Institute, Theologians on Modern Politics, which is co-edited by Darabos Ádám and Janša András. And today we're going to be listening to them in discussion with Nyirkos Tamás, moderated by Solène. So I had a look at the book today, and it's very interesting. I love a well-structured book, and it's a beautifully structured book. It has 3 parts, each with 6 chapters. The first third is looking at Catholic theologians in general over the last couple of centuries, so a very Catholic idea of modern. And then also 6 chapters in part 2 of Protestant or Western Protestant theologians. And then there's a third section looking at Hungarian theologians in the last couple of centuries, which I think is quite an interesting structure to have a dialogue around these issues. But I think this book is important really for 3 reasons. First of all, I think we often forget that these days we have many people with opinions on politics, but one group that are less listened to and certainly less known are in fact theologians. And so I think they have something useful to say on politics, and they'll be discussing this. But also, the other problem is that these days not many people know the thought of very many theologians. And so the book, by looking at not so much biographies, but looking at different thinkers with a biographical framing, really gives us an opportunity to understand their thought in context, and therefore its relevance to us today. But the most important point really here is why is the Danube producing this book? Why is it something that we think is important? And I think it's because if you look at what the Danube Institute does, the Danube Institute is a Western-facing, quite Atlanticist organization. And if you look at the Danube's history of the last 12, 13 years, what it's been is a vector. It's been a vector to introduce the world to Hungary, but also to introduce Hungary to the West. And in this sense, the book is a good example of this, by looking at what, in a sense, Hungarian thinking can learn from broader theologians, be they Catholic or Protestant, but also looking at what theologians in general, or scholars of politics in general, might learn from looking at Hungarian theologians and their thought, which perhaps is not as well known. So the book really captures sort of the classic spirit of the Danube Institute and what we're trying to do. Anyway, that's enough from me. And so we're going to have a good discussion, moderated by Solène, and I'll leave it to her. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Nicholson, for this kind introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Danube Institute conference, which is giving us the opportunity to discuss the great figures of Christian theology of the 19th and 20th century, and most importantly, their major contribution to modern political thought. The book, Theologians on Modern Politics, here, recently published by the Danube Institute, I think has a great merit of making accessible the thought of all these great theologians of the past 2 centuries that is sometimes very sophisticated, and at the same time it makes us rediscover a number of little-known figures, including from the Hungarian Catholic tradition. The key challenge of this conversation will be to study the relevance of this thinking for understanding today's world and to somehow bring answers to today's challenge in a world that is very different from the 19th century and the challenges brought by industrial revolution or by the 2 world wars in the 20th century. So that's why we're going to try to reflect on all that today, and we will do that with the main authors of the book. Ádám Darabos, first, political scientist, senior research fellow at the Danube Institute, and at the Research Institute for Religion and Society, Ludovika University of Public Service. And András Jancsó, Assistant Research Fellow at the same Research Institute for Religion and Society. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Tamás Nyirkos, political philosopher and research fellow at the Research Institute for Politics and Government at Ludovika University. He's also associate professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Pázmány Péter Catholic University. So we'll begin today with a talk by Ádám Darabos, who is going to introduce the book with a special focus on Christian realism, one of his areas of expertise, from the perspective mostly of John Coleman Bennett and Antal Schütz. We'll then have a round table with the three speakers, followed by a time of exchange with the audience. I'm Solène Tadié, Europe Correspondent for the National Catholic Register, EWTN News, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Thank you very much, and Dr. Darabos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Solène. Dear ladies and gentlemen, what approach should Christians take to modern politics? What are their obligations in contemporary public life? Which Christian values should be endorsed in a modern democracy, and which political instruments are permitted while doing so? A similar set of questions was posed at the beginning of every article in our series titled Theologians of Modern Politics, published in the Hungarian Conservative Online, which we began around 3 years ago with my close colleague András Jancsó. First, we decided to write a few essays on the political ideas of theologians, and to be honest, we didn't really expect that it would be enough for a volume. At first, it was not. But as the material grew, and we had 12 articles and an excellent recommendation from our directors at the Danube Institute to write 6 more, it was enough. But how did we arrive at the idea to write about such a matter? During our university years, including our doctoral research, both András and I dealt with an outstanding theorist who happened to be both a theologian and a political thinker. András is a promising young researcher of a European Catholic, Joseph Ratzinger, later Benedict XVI. At the same time, I'm very interested in an American Protestant, Reinhold Niebuhr. Though we went through several years of higher education in political science, which we both admired, we also realized that authors like Ratzinger or Niebuhr provide a distinct understanding of politics from political scientists and secular political philosophers. Moreover, they are underrepresented in both education and public discussion, a gap that we aim to fill with our work. In other words, we believe that many would benefit from familiarizing themselves with these two theologians. But not only with these two theologians. As we expanded our research and research focus and delve into the thoughts of other theologians who dealt with political problems, we realized that we have many more to show. Obviously, András began to deal with European Catholic thinkers, to present 6 notable figures: Pope Leo XIII, Pope Pius XII, Erik Peterson, Joseph Ratzinger, Johann Baptist Metz, and Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde. I'm sure that András' concise summaries are able to show that they are inspired sources of our political knowledge, and they represent a vibrant tradition in the long history of Christian political thought. After Abraham Kuyper, a Dutch theologian and prime minister, I dealt with Protestants from America, including Walter Rauschenbusch, Paul Tillich, Reinhold Niebuhr, Helmut Richard Niebuhr, and John Coleman Bennett. I'm more confident in writing reviews than summaries, so I try to guess the essential political implications of a book or an essay. From the American tradition, which is almost entirely unknown in Hungary, or at least the political implications of those theologians, one of the key takeaways, like in the European tradition, was that these authors are connected in many ways. Thus, we have links between them. We have links between the authors, and we have a central message. which is that theologians do contribute to an understanding of politics. Then, why not compile these short summaries and reviews into a volume, so the possible positive features of these short articles remain, but together the links are more visible, and they, as examples, validate the existence and the significance of our message that theologians do contribute to our understanding of politics. What I've said implies that the first part of the research, so the European and the American, was very organic in a way that one author led to another, and one article on the political implications of a theologian led to another. In contrast, the Hungarian part was written with the objective that they wanted to publish, or more accurately, finish this volume. So regarding Hungary, we intentionally chose the most influential authors, such as Sándor Giesven, Ottokár Prohászka, Béla Banga, and Margit Slakta. We have also added two less-known but highly knowledgeable theologians, Antal Schütz and Pál Kecskés. I must say that I'm delighted with this chapter because it represents one of the missions of the Danube Institute, which Callum also mentioned. We deliver ideas of great theologians of the Western world, which we Hungarians may need or would benefit from. Still, in return, we are enthusiastic about showing the richness of Hungarian theology and political theology, which in some cases rival the sophistication of the great Westerners. When I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking, which substantive argument shall I echo from the volume? Shall I underline the difference between theologians with direct messages to politics with those with indirect ones? Shall I emphasize the relevance of theological anthropology of these theologians as the basis of their political thought? Or shall I stress the difference between these three traditions? No, I must give an insight to the book by sharing a few thoughts on specific theologians, and should also try to convince you that they are still relevant to us in the 21st century. Do not worry, we're not going to investigate 18 theologians now, only two, one American and one Hungarian, but Solène mentioned John Coleman Bennett and Antal Schütz. The most people know of Bennett, if they've heard his name, is that he was a very close colleague of Reinhold Niebuhr. Imagine that you are a talented philosopher, theologian, political thinker, and university professor, and everyone knows you as a close colleague of someone, a more famous theologian, political thinker, and university professor. That was the case in regards to Bennett, who shared many insights of Niebuhr, as they are both treated as the representatives of Christian realism. Interestingly, even though Niebuhr is considered as the most significant figure of Christian realism, it was Bennett who wrote a systematic account of this concept. Bennett's book titled, surprisingly, Christian Realism, was published in 1941, and though not with the same eloquence and intellectual might as Niebuhr, the book included many tenets of Christian realism. The relevance of the adequate understanding of human nature, the dangers of egoism and pride, the necessity of social responsibility, and the assumption that politics is limited. Given that this is not a university lecture, but a short introduction, I would like to accentuate only one element, the last one, the limits of politics. I believe that we are always tempted to treat politics as the main instrument to solve our problems. We are in an economic crisis, politics should solve it. We are in a cultural conflict, politics should solve it. We are in a real war, politics should solve it. It is even more interesting that when we live in a prosperous era, without economic crisis, cultural conflict, or real war, we still expect politicians to solve all our problems, or many. The worst irony is, just like now, when we do not realize that we are living in crisis of war, but still expect politicians to solve all our problems. To restore the right standard, we should read, for instance, Bennett, who, beyond his theoretical investigations of politics, directly reflects on the Second World War. It seems that he would be content with a modest end, somehow solve the problem of living together without destroying each other. In our era, when new wars occur, we could agree with Dennett that we should have neither utopian nor too optimistic expectation towards politics. Niebuhr somehow like this said something like this when was discussing the nuclear dilemma. Now it is not the time to reach the heaven, it is time to avoid hell. Nonetheless, as most Christians realists argue, a limited aim does not in any ways limit our responsibility for social issues, and we should still have the firm conviction that the situation's outcome should meet the criterion of justice. The Hungarian example would be Antal Schütz, a learned priest and theologian from the Piarist order and a university professor at the Pázmány Péter University. Schütz had an excellent volume, which can be translated as Hungarian Vitality, a collection of his lectures and radio speeches in the 1930s. It is full of theological lamentations, but it includes straightforward arguments about Hungarian politics and Hungarian history. Again, I will only emphasize one interesting but hopefully insightful element, because one of the critical convictions of Schütz is that we must immerse in the history of Hungary to set our aims, prospects, and strategies appropriately. He does a kind of national characterology when he argues that Hungarians are not really pessimists, even though sometimes it seems that we are, and we have had several notable pessimist poets and historical figures and sorrowful eras, Tatars, Turks, and so forth. On the other hand, Schütz argues that this mistaken view that Hungarians are pessimists is the consequence of either a biased historical analysis or a projection of an unfavorable phase in the nation's life. So pessimism is present, but not a dominant trend, and we should fight it because it doesn't only deceive us in regards to our history, at last we are here for 1,000 years, but also immobilizes political and social actions. So, or hence, it stands in the way of national growth. I'm really sorry to claim that even though Hungarians are not pessimists, according to Schütz, we are not perfect. We do have several frailties and weaknesses, according to Schütz as well, at least two. First, we tend to daydream or imagine certain situations and outcomes without investing any energy in action. Second, we often lack the discipline to work on a regular schedule and are characterized by work avoidance. Of course, we can debate with Schütz, but that is not the point now. The point is that if, in line with our faith with God, we want to, make Hungary great again, we need to be aware of our historical legacy, both sides, the good and the bad. We also have to know our Hungarian character. Again, good and bad tendencies. Schütz guides us in the history of Christian Hungary and encourages us to be brave enough to face both our sides. These are certainly relevant even in the 21st century. Before I conclude, I would like to express my gratitude to those who were part of this project. First and foremost to the authors András Jancsó, Hanna Zoe Kecskeméti, and Nóra Lengyel. Then the editorial advisors, Tamás Nyirkos, István Kis, and the late David Martin Jones. Furthermore, we would like to thank the laborious and excellent proofreading of Birgitta Kringa Svéd and the graphic team Zoltán Keci and Zoltán Dózsa for the attractive outlook. Finally, we praise the Batyányi Lajos Foundation and the Danube Institute who supported this research. My last words now, hopefully. This book is not primarily for academics. Although we really hope that we, as young researchers who had the opportunity to glimpse into the minds of these great theologians, are prepared to convince them or enrich their perspective. Still, we dare to claim that this volume is not the scientific book of the century that will shake the whole world. Nevertheless, It is a book for those who are interested in religion, theology, and Christianity, and how it relates to politics. It is for all those who are ready for an intellectual adventure and would like to get acquainted with great theologians and political thinkers. We wish to provide material for and encourage the first step of that journey with our modest volume, Theologians on Modern Politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Darabos, for this overview of your work and these very insightful reflections, which actually call for many others, and we're here to discuss that. And especially if we want to draw some keys from these authors to understand today's world and try to bring some answers to the current challenges. Times have changed a lot, but from what you were saying, these tendencies to expect politicians to solve all of our problems is not a new issue, and it existed already 2 centuries ago. And so I would like to ask you the first question of this discussion, and I would like to still focus a little bit on the question of Christian realism that is the core of your reflection throughout the book, and to some extent also the angle through which you analyze the thought of most of these great figures. So do you personally identify with this approach of Christian realism? What is your specific definition of that? I mean, I love the fact when in your talk when you basically say that it is de facto an alternative to an idealistic worldview, and that it's a way of being able to live all together without being too optimistic or utopians or anything like that. So I would really like to know your approach, and how do you apply such Christian realism to today's issues such as environment, very complex issues. How do we Christians should see the world with this approach? Environmentalism, new technologies, so IA, the question of degrowth as well, that is also spreading among the conservative world as well. So I would be very curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Christian realism is mentioned several times in this volume, but I try to limit myself and include only at Bennett and Reinhold Niebuhr, where it is really important. So how do I identify, or what's my relation to Christian realism? To be honest, I really try to remain in the role of a researcher. So what I try to do is to understand what Christian realism is, try to understand its strengths and weaknesses. But of course, if you are, or at least me, when I read about Christian realism or Reinhold Niebuhr, I'm pretty convinced that Christian realism can give new answers or novel answers to our problems in this world. So although I try to remain a researcher, as an individual, I'm convinced that it is really useful. But what is Christian realism? So just really a few words on it. I think, of course, we have several conceptualizations and definitions, so we always have to say that. But what I understand from it is that basically it has 3 elements. The first one is a certain understanding of the human nature. The second one is a certain understanding of the politics, of the nature of politics. And the third, that it also has a normative element. The first one on this theological anthropology is related to the fact that Christian realists, especially Reinhold Niebuhr, one of the most famous American Protestant theologians and political thinkers in the 20th century America, argued that we have to look at both sides of the human nature, that we are made in the image of God, but we are also fallen creatures, so we are sinners. And so that was one of the main tenets of Christian realism. Of course, we can go into that. Niebuhr also argues that we have radical freedom, and with that radical freedom, we can use that radical freedom in order to unfold both our creative and destructive tendencies. The second one is more about a certain interpretation of political life, the nature of politics, which relates to political realism. So Niebuhr tried to emphasize that politics, especially international politics, is a world full of conflicts, frictions, tensions, competitions, wars. So, and in that world we need power. And if we want to understand the historical reality, we also have to take into account the elements of self-interest and power. So that's a kind of political realism. Thus we have a political realism, and some might say that also we have a theological realism. Others would say that a realist understanding of theological anthropology, but we have two kinds of, let's say, realism. But the third one is really important. What makes Christian realism is a normative aspect. That they think, these Christian realists argue, that we have to take action, we have to take into account the social responsibility to achieve an end that meets the criterion of justice. So this whole issue is about reaching social justice. So I think, it is really interesting because many conservatives do find or they sympathize with Niebuhr because of his political realism, but on the other hand, they have to consider that Niebuhr was a leftist, a socialist, even a Christian Marxist for a few years. We might go into that. It's a really interesting topic. And of course, at the end of his life, he went towards the right, but he remained to be a socialist thinker. How can we use this whole thing today? I kind of agree with this question or your assumption posed in the question that in any place where we expect or where we realize that there is a tendency for idealism, Christian realism can help us. So every part which you mentioned, AI, environment issues, everything, when there are points on or an idealistic understanding, especially in case of human nature, that we are good or we are essentially good, and we build on that assumption, then Christian realism can help us. But just the last words, Christian realism is usually used in America for foreign policy strategies. But I think that if you consider those main tenets of Christian realism, you can also apply elsewhere, anywhere where you find idealism.
Thank you. It's quite interesting what you've just said about all these thinkers of Christian realism that are a source of reflection for many Christians, even in the conservative world. But they used to be very connected with socialism, Christian Marxism. And I really like the way that you developed that in the book, showing how the context in which it developed, whether on the Protestant side, with people like Niebuhr, or on the Hungarian, maybe Catholic side, with someone like Ottokar Prohaska or Pál Kecskec. It was quite fascinating the way you showed that, and also drawing the conclusion that Christian Marxism or Christian socialism, even whatever we think about that, is incompatible with the very idea of social democracy. And I would love to hear you about that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated issue because we have to understand and differentiate between socialism, Christian socialism, Marxism, Christian Marxism, communism, Christian socialism. So we have many things, many different things, and they are all different in Hungary and in America. So it's very hard. I would like to highlight only one difference. So the idea that the historical legacy influenced the minds of those theologians and how it influenced those that were in Hungary and those in America. So in Hungary, Christianity and socialism I think they've never been in a good relationship. So they were not really friends. Even if some theologians like Sándor Giesen was interested in social ideas, and he was socially very sensitive, and in some respects, or in some political instruments, he agreed with the Social Democrats, for instance, in the case of a strike, or some parts of it, the whole idea between Christianity and social democracy in Hungary, it was conflictual. And it was even more problematic after the revolutions, after the First World War. So in the Republic of Councils, which is a rule of terror by the Hungarian Bolsheviks in 1919, it was really a short period, but there was a huge persecution of Christians and especially ecclesiastics. And after that, it was obvious that everyone who remained to be a Christian or a Catholic were against socialist social democracy, and of course they were supported by the ideas of the papal encyclicals, which try to distance themselves from this socialist thought. So I think that's very important to understand that Hungarian history is different than American history, and we can see that in the thoughts of those theologians and their relation to Christianity and socialism. And let's see another part, for instance, America, where we have the social gospel tradition with this very idea that we have to realize the kingdom of God on earth, and we have to do everything. We have to be very active socially to be able to do that. And even when someone like Niebuhr tried to give a realist answer, first he found, for instance, radical socialism, or radical Marxism, or not radical Marxism, Marxism, simple Marxism. So Niebuhr read a lot of Marx, and he agreed with Marx that one of the problems, or one of the key problems of this whole issue is the underlying economic system, capitalism. So, and he also appreciated the political realism of Marx. Some researchers use the concept of hermeneutics of suspicion, that there is this interest and power that lingers in the shadow, and Marx was able to show those points. But Niebuhr also thought that the vengeance of the proletariat is very frightening. And he was also very skeptical in regards to the moral capacity of the proletariat. So he always criticized, and he called himself a Christian Marxist for a few years. But we have to understand that if you call yourself a Christian Marxist, you have to read those arguments and not judge them, like from Hungary, that, oh my God, why are you a Christian Marxist? How incompatible they are. You have to understand why they choose that idea. And I think I do not have to defend Niebuhr, because he defends himself, and he also is going to become one of the greatest intellectual opponents of communism. So first, we have to get knowledge on these theologians, and maybe if not judge them, but maybe then we can criticize them.
Beyond any judgment, it's very interesting to compare the evolution of these thoughts about economics over the centuries, because, you know, in the 19th century, it's true that in the Catholic world, there was an overwhelming adhesion to like a more, maybe somehow socialist view of the world, but prior to that, then now today we have this kind of belief that capitalism is part of the Protestant thought, and also because of Max Weber, but Max Weber himself, in his book Ethics of Protestantism, also highlights the fact that prior to the Industrial Revolution, all the theories of capitalism were basically developed by Catholics. As early as the Middle Age, with the first Franciscans, there are many books, many authors who discuss that. with first Franciscan, then the School of Salamanca, then the Jesuits with someone like Leonardus Lessius. You have a very interesting book by the Belgian scholar Wim de Kock, The Market of Merit, and he explains that in a lot of details, and I think it's quite fascinating. Maybe Dr. Nyirkos, if you would like to maybe talk about that, because I know you have a good understanding of this topic. If you have any thoughts on this topic in the time of Rerum Novarum, or any of you.
It looks like it's better than me, because I'm no expert of economic history or history of capitalism, and I'm no historian in the first place. So I can only say share a few thoughts as a lay person here. It is true that, of course, when we talk about capitalism in the Middle Ages, it is avant la lettre capitalism. So yes, of course, we had reflections on the workings of the market, on prices and production already in the Middle Ages. So in Saint Thomas Aquinas and later many others like Saint Antoninus of Florence and many others. Especially in the early modern age then. But to start, you mentioned Max Weber. So let's face one thing, that even Max Weber acknowledges that these early theories of the market or of trade or early industry were mostly written by Catholics. Which for Max Weber may have been something of a puzzle. So why it wasn't a Protestant venture? But since the early 20th century, we learned so much that even Max Weber's main thesis about Protestant ethics and the rise of capitalism is almost totally erroneous. So it is simply not true that Protestant countries were ahead of Catholic countries in general, and especially because of their Protestantism. It is a very well-built argument in Max Weber, but as more accurate historians will show you, for example, in Hungary, it is Péter who actually listed Max Weber's Protestant ethics among the big historical misconceptions. He wrote a book about 100 historical misconceptions, and there is a separate chapter on why Max Weber was misled. So to answer the first question, it is no wonder, no miracle that Catholics were just as sensitive to the rise of capitalism, or even more sensitive than Protestants. But let us face one thing, that their main worries were such things as like what is a just price? What is just pricing, for example? And this is what very soon in the early or the modern age, and later in the 17th, 18th, and especially in the 19th century, when all these meditations about, for example, just prices, the just working of markets and so on, were deemed obsolete. So it is something alien to the real world of markets, the real world of capitalism. These were actually moral theories about what is just and unjust in economics. So I would say that. It is kind of a natural process that during the 19th or early 20th centuries, these theories went to oblivion, and they are beginning to be discovered these days, these past few decades, when we again start to realize that capitalism is more than just a technical issue. It is more than just a way of organization. It is also something. Capitalism itself is something with a moral message, and this is why I think that in the present day, what is most interesting in theology. These are not Catholic, but Protestant theologian Harvey Cox, for example, wrote about the market as God. It's a very famous book. It's published about 10 years ago, or maybe less, or some others. These actually try to argue that capitalism. We misunderstand capitalism if we only think of it as something value-free, something just, as I said, a technical way of organizing production and trade. But we have to understand that deep down it has the exact same overarching moral framework, and even I dare say metaphysical framework. Of how the world and how humanity is as a real religion, like, for example, Christianity.
Thank you very much for this answer. I would just ask a very quick question about that, about the Rerum Novarum, because it's been 130 years or so later. Of course, the sociocultural context has changed completely, but still, back then, what we can see is that the intellectual world was like very dynamic. Leo XIII was inspired both by, of course, Father Liberatore, but also the School of Angers, the School of Liège. They had a very vivid breeding ground for having new ideas. And nowadays, we see that these socio-economic issues are not really attractive to Christian thinkers anymore. It looks like it, at least. And so I would, how do you explain that? Any of you, if someone wants to answer that?
Well, I have a very simple explanation. Maybe it's too down to earth explanation, but let us not forget when we were talking about the Middle Ages or the 17th century, these were ages of polyhisters. So when a theologian was at the same time a linguist, a natural theorist, I'd also say a natural scientist, also an economist, also a political thinker, a moral thinker, and so on and so on. And even in the early modern ages, there were many polyhisters. Today, let's just face it, that it is not only the economy, but also, you mentioned, for example, artificial intelligence or ecology. These are all very specific disciplines with their own rules and with their own research fields. It is perhaps wrong to expect that, for example, theologians, let alone priests, will start to do economics. But yes, we do have counterexamples. So, for example, here in Hungary, I am myself part of a research or more like an education project, research and education project, led by Hungarian Dominican sister, who is also an economist. Laura Baritz, of course. And this Christian social principles in the economy, which has many students around the country, and also many projects supported by international organizations, publishing books and so on. So I would say that the interest, it is there. It is only a very difficult thing to be both a theologian or a cleric or a sister or a brother and an economic expert at the same time.
Well, that would be quite interesting to see a kind of revival in these circles. I would like now to ask you, András Jancsó, a question regarding the book, because I was quite interested in knowing that you chose to divide the book in 3 parts, and making one part European Catholicism, one part Western Protestantism, and then one part Hungarian Catholicism or Protestantism. So you separated it. And what makes you think, or how were you able to outline some kind of an identity for European Catholicism? I would be very interested in hearing your points of view from that.
Not an easy question, but first of all, of course, it should be noted that Catholicism defines itself as universal. But the different regions and different continents have their own specific characteristics. And here in Europe, we can see that modern political thought is linked to the European Catholic tradition in many ways. And this is no coincidence, since the great ideas in the 19th and 20th centuries were formulated here on the European continent, where the Catholicism was dominant for many centuries. And I would like to draw attention the research of Jørgen Moller, a contemporary Danish political scientist, and he points out the contemporary political science or political science research often interprets church developments as lay developments, which makes it impossible to understand Christian roots. For example, we think of the secular principles of the political decision-making. For the secular institution, the long-standing tradition in the church provided a model which was an important element in the constitutional transformation. And by the way, we can read about this in Tamás' excellent book on how monastic regulation became a model for secular rulings. Anyway, I have to undertake two things in the book, in the chapter on European Catholicism. Firstly, I want to highlight the thinking of Pope Leo XIII and Pope Pius XII, the leaders of the Catholic Church, and how they influenced thinking about modern politics. I think without knowing their thoughts on politics, we cannot understand the development of modern political thought. One concrete example is Christian democracy, to which Pope Leo XIII made an unquestionable contribution, or even the principle of subsidiarity, which is also a principle formulated within the Catholic Church and which today determines it not only the European political philosophy, but also the politics and the functioning of the European Union. And my second aim, closely linked to my PhD research, is to highlight the history of German philosophy after the Second World War, which goes beyond Germany. And in my view, based on my PhD research, through Ratzinger, who is also part of this tradition, this German philosophical school has influenced the whole Catholic Church with the election of Ratzinger to Pope.
And yeah, I really particularly liked your chapter about Pius XII, who is a very misunderstood figure because of World War II. And I really like the way you presented his figure, also highlighting that he developed a very strong, very solid theory, anti-totalitarian, anti-authoritarian theories. And although he was defended by very prominent personalities such as Roosevelt's envoy, his ambassador, Harold Titman, who wrote a book about it. Then you have Rabbi Dalin, for instance. How do you explain that nowadays, with all these distinguished people who defended him, that his thought is so misunderstood, so unknown?
Unfortunately, I am neither a historian nor a geopolitical expert, but your question is very important. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted Pope Pius XII to be included in this book. As for the first part of your question, how did Pope Pius' image change drastically after the Second World War, and how he became Hitler's pope in the public opinion? a Belgian church historian, Johan X, shows how absurd propaganda claiming that Pope Pius was sympathetic to the Nazis is based on Rolf Hochhuth's play The Deputy. This play was commissioned and funded by the Soviet Secret Service, and X points out, based on 2,800 Jewish letters requesting aid, that Pope Pius personally helped the persecuted and supported the extensive Vatican rescue network. And the root of the Soviet attempt, the character assassination, was undoubtedly Pope Pius XII firm opposition to communism. And as for the historic coincidence, here I would like to point out that I think it is the tragedy of the history that the words of Pope Pius crying out for peace were received by the world leaders with the same indifference as the messages of Pope Francis, who in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which was published in 2020, proclaimed, quoting Pope Paul VI, "Never again war." Perhaps we should finally consider the words of the popes, just maybe.
Yes, speaking about the war, I think it's very interesting because Pius XII had very prophetic words during the Eucharistic Congress in 1938, and it was just a few months before the beginning of the war, and he had very strong words. And of course, the coincidence with the 2021 Eucharistic Congress here in Budapest, just a few months before the resumption of the war between Russia and Ukraine, escaped no one. I mean, like at least if you were an attentive observer, it would you would find it very surprising. So it looked like also Pius XII had a very strong, prophetic vision for the world regarding war, and so of course, I would like to know also. You had very specific affection for Hungary. And we saw that during the communism, when he wrote also encyclicals calling Hungary a noble country. So he had a very specific affection for this country. And many people thought that this Eucharistic Congress was a gift given to Hungary to help the country go through these terrible decades of communism afterwards. I don't know if you had any thought about that. Why Hungary was so important to him, this relationship with the country?
I think it's connected his absolutely opposition to communism. So after the Second World War, he was the great hero for Hungary, and he tried to save Cardinal Mindszenty. He tried to support Cardinal Mindszenty, and I think during the Eucharist Congress, he earned a really good memory from Cardinal Mindszenty and from Hungarians.
It's true, and I would like now because we have just a few minutes left, but to talk about another very misunderstood figure, that is Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, that is also in your book, and you describe him as a resolute anti-modern, someone who is hostile or at least distrusts modernity and modern thinking, and it's a very interesting thing because. When he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he was known as Panzer Cardinal. He was known as people would say as the super conservative cardinal and then super conservative pope. But it was what we should highlight is that during the Vatican, during Vatican II, he was considered a really progressive participant in the council, and he described himself as a progressive, and he said that also in his memoir with Peter Seewald in the book. So this hermeneutic of continuity, I think no one understands it really. How would you describe it to understand why he was first considered a progressive and then a conservative, although his thinking never really changed?
I think this question highlights an essential point. How can we interpret an author whose decades academic work has created a rich corpus? And in the media, often we hear Pope Francis contrast with Pope Benedict, where Benedict is described as an old-fashioned conservative. I think this comparison is very simplified, and it's simply not true. And if we look Ratzinger theological position on Vatican II, which Solène mentioned, we see that Ratzinger belonged to the progressive school of theology. However, it should be noted that in the second session of the synod, Ratzinger was already critical of the progressive circle with which he collaborated. And later Ratzinger said that it was not himself who had changed, but thus around him who had moved to a way that Ratzinger no longer found acceptable. But I want not focus on his theological work, but on his political thinking, because he was never really progressive in this aspect. His political thought belongs to the post-Second World War German political philosophical tradition, and Joachim Ritter is a central figure in this tradition, who is not well known outside Germany. And Joachim Ritter, who's a German philosopher, formulated the so-called compensation theory. And Ritter says, I quote, "Society needs an organ to compensate for its lack of history," end of quote. This philosophical idea is translated into the language of state theory by one of his students, the famous German constitutional judge Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde. And we call this the Böckenförde paradox or Böckenförde dilemma, which claims that the liberal secular state lives on premises that it cannot guarantee by itself. And I think Ratzinger will radicalize this Böckenförde dilemma into his political philosophy. And Ratzinger claims that the dilemma raised by Böckenförde has been conferred. So the state needs forces outside itself, which in Ratzinger's concept is, of course, Christianity or Christian morality. By the way, and it's a really interesting point, Ratzinger carried out this radicalization with the help of Robert Spemann's philosophy. And Robert Spemann's also a German Catholic philosopher, and he was also the student of Joachim Ritter, whose main criticism of his teacher was that Ritter was stuck with functionalism. And this critical thought is taken up by Ratzinger when he further reflects on Böckenförde's dilemma from his Christian perspective. And I think this is a very exciting and interesting intellectual connection in the history of the 20th German philosophy, which certainly highlights that the fact that Ratzinger political thought was neither progressive nor old-fashioned conservative, but belonged to a well-defined liberal conservative tradition. And this is what I try to show in the book and more detailed in my PhD.
It's very well done, and thank you. It can all be summarized under the concept of hermeneutic of continuity. And so you've just explained that very well. So I would like to ask just one more question so that the audience can also ask questions. I was struck by the figure of Margit Slacha in the book, Christian conservative feminism. It's a concept that is very interesting for me as a woman. and how, as a Christian woman, I'm always surprised, like with this word feminism, and that's some Christian women can actually define themselves, identify as feminists. How can we reconcile these seemingly antinomic concepts? And I mean, I'm wondering if feminism isn't by nature a kind of constructivism that seeks to change human nature, like thinking that being a male or a female is just a social construction. So how can you reconcile both? And I would love for you to talk about that. Maybe you, Dr. Nyirkos. I don't know, you are an expert also in secular religion, and nowadays feminism has become a kind of secular religion.
At least I can pretend I am an expert. So, yeah. Yeah, but no. So I think that there is no real tension or contradiction here. So, there are many types of feminism. And what you mentioned, that one type of feminism is kind of like a social constructivism. It is true, but there are many other forms of feminism. So I would say that it is mentioned in the book. When writing about Margit Schlachter, the book emphasizes that for her, of course, the equality of men and women has never meant that women and men were the same. So they had different identities, and if we just think about, second wave feminism, one of the good things about second wave feminism is that it doesn't want to make everyone, men and women, identical. But it says that, for example, in Iris Young and others, that there should be different concepts of justice. So there is a multiple concept of justice. The same thing may not be just for men and women. So if we use these reservations, so that for us feminism means equality but doesn't mean sameness. When we say that that feminism doesn't declare that all our sexual identities are constructions. Now, if you just take a look around in contemporary society, the fiercest debates are actually inside the gender movement between those radical feminists who still insist on the woman as or the female as a biological identity, and those who actually think that every sexual identity or gender identity is simply a construction. So, of course, Schlachter was never a constructivist in this way, but it doesn't exclude that she was a true and sincere feminist. And to speak about Christianity and feminism, so again, this is one of those modern prejudices. That Christianity is something essentially patriarchal, or it is a man's thing. No. So let us face it that during history, although I said I'm not a historian, but as someone educated in popular history, so we all know that the position of women in ancient societies, in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, was much worse than in medieval Christianity. Exactly. So it is a prejudice that we think that there was this free world of Athenian democracy. No, Athenian democracy was certainly not for women. This was really a society in which women should have stayed home. And that was their only place in society. So yes, so when in the Middle Ages, for example, female inheritance came into law. It was a big struggle of the church hierarchy to make it prevail over old tribal regulations, for example, where only males could inherit. So and let us not forget that throughout history, we always had those great female saints. So from Santa Teresa of Avila to Saint Margaret of Cortona, just to mention my own favorites. And they were actually listened to by popes, listened to by bishops. They were actually in very high esteem, And if you make a volume, for example, of medieval Christian mystics, it will be 90% women. And these were respected women, and women respected by men. So it has never been the case that Christianity had some problem with women's equality or women or women's rights. It was only a different conception of equality and rights, of course, than what we have today.
And what is interesting is that, like you highlighted, during the Middle Ages, women had so much freedom, and then it changed during Renaissance with the revival of this kind of fascination for Roman law and this kind of the beginning of Enlightenment. I really like the book by Régine Pernoud that was published in English, Women in the Time of the Cathedrals. And whoever is interested in this topic will really find it fascinating. It's in English as well. I would have many other questions to ask you, but I need not to be selfish, and I should leave the audience also share their thoughts on all. Oh, so we already have one question. You have.
Thanks so much for your time. This has been a really fun conversation. My name is John. I'm a senior fellow with the MCC Center for Law, studying with the very esteemed Dr. Sabi, who happened to be here too. I've been in Washington, D.C. for about 6 years now, before coming here to Hungary. My area of focus has been the intersection of faith and politics, so I was very interested to come here tonight. In America, we have a phrase that's been highly taken out of context since it started. It's called separation of church and state. Of course, we've all heard this phrase. Somewhat of a misnomer. Some will say it means that there should be no entanglement, no connection between the church and state. Others say that there should definitely be an influence from the church to the state. So, of course, my background is that, yes, the church should very much be integrated in politics. The church should be morality. Christian morality should be a foundation for law. But that's my expertise is in America. I am curious, where do you think that should happen here in Hungary? Say issues on abortion or sexuality, things like that, where Christianity certainly speaks to. How can that be applied in Hungarian politics?
Okay, so just to reflect briefly on the theoretical foundations. So, of course, when we speak about a separation of church and state, we should make it clear what we mean by that. Of course, already there in the Gospels, we have, rendered the things unto Caesar that belong to Caesar, and the things that belong to God. So, of course, it means that the institutions of state and the hierarchy of the church should be separated. So this is indeed a very old and basic Christian teaching, that in this sense, the separation of powers, secular power and ecclesiastical power. But what you speak about is a separation of church and society, rather. Church and social morals, social practices. And here, referring back to what you said about Pope Benedict XVI. So this is what actually Pope Benedict XVI realized, that although early on he was afraid with Böckenförde that the modern secular state will have no morals, no ethical teachings, no nothing if it ceases to be Christian, he himself realized later on that no, it's not the case. If society and if social ethics is no longer Christian, then it will not become empty; it will become something else. So this is why in this book with Sevald in his book of interviews, he himself called this modern liberal age an age of anti-religion, pseudo-religion, or counter-religious. Because he himself realized later on that there was an overarching. So yes, so I don't know the correct answer to your more concrete question. So how it applies to Hungary, but I would say that yes, I always try to explain to everyone that this is the main thing that we have to understand, that we do not operate in in a neutral environment. So it is called liberal and the state is neutral. No, it is not ideologically neutral. It is not morally empty. A contemporary Western society or a contemporary Western government. No, they are loaded with moral principles. They are loaded with ideological principles, and you have to realize that yes. So this is a struggle. It is not like operating in a neutral or in an ethical vacuum. So you have to. I don't have a more concrete answer to that. I only want to say that you have to understand it and make it very clear to yourself that yes, you are in a struggle with conflicting moral or social principles, and that is what you have to.
Just one quick word. You have a book in preparation, right, about the secular religions?
Oh yes.
Just a word about
this
that,
is a place for self-advertisement. So yeah, this August it will be coming out, published by Routledge, and the title is "Secular Religions: The Key Concept."
A very timely topic.
Actually, it started out as a conventional monograph. I wrote the Hungarian version, Political Theologies, about 5 or 6 years ago, and when I started to rewrite it, I realized that it can only become an encyclopedia because I collected no less than 107 secular religions. From the religion of capitalism, the religion of money and market, to the religion of nationalism, patriotism, to the religions of artificial intelligence, to the religions of feminism, gender theory, and many others, to taking selfies or sports, and neither of them was invented by me. It was only collected from existing academic literature. And more than 100 entries will be in this book, which shows that we do not live in a secular age. We do not live in an ideology-free Western world. But to the contrary, we live in a society full of ideologies.
Ádám, Darabos.
Yeah. Just want to. On this idea of the separation of church and state, yes, of course, what Tamás mentioned, there should be a separation, and I think everywhere you just have to, even if you are a churchman and you feel that their success comes with political influence, you just have to stay very strong to hold your independence. But that's not what I really wanted to speak about, but the idea that when you are raised in Hungary as a Christian and you want to understand the role of Christianity in politics, who is the guide? Who is the guide? Who do you turn towards? And when I was looking at Reinhold Niebuhr, an American, I was really shocked that here is a theologian who is not only a theologian but a political thinker, and he is very famous. So under the communism, of course, we didn't have any chance to have a great public theologians who can show us how to think about those relationships. So this is connected to this idea of separation of the churches, as Tamás said, that in Hungary, I think that we still need to be aware that we can speak about those things. And we can speak about those things in light of the thought of those theologians. I think that's a great difference between America and Hungary, and we still need, time to academize the modern times or the new times after communism.
Next question, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to inquire about the social responsibility of the state in light of Christian thought. As we can see that both in Catholic social teachings, the principle of solidarity is one of the most prominent ones, but also in Protestant, for example, the Lutheran tradition, equality, which stems from the human nature, is very prominent. At least that's what we see in the economic systems of certain North European countries. And I would like to, I'm really interested on your perspectives about social aspect or the social policy and its importance in the state in light of Christian thought, be it providing the equality of chances or opportunities in education or housing or caring for the poor, and also how much do you think this is prevalent in current Christian politics? Thank you.
I'm not going to give a general answer for that, sorry. I'm going to go into a little bit specifics, based on the book. Because if you are looking at the book, I think you would find many theologians that deal with the problem of social responsibility and how the state is connected. So is it the role of the state to help people? And if it is, then how they should solve it? But one thing is really important, and I was astonished by the system that was depicted by Pál Kecskés. He was a Hungarian theologian, one of the greatest Hungarian theologians of the 20th century. And what he tries to introduce is in line with the Quadragesimo Anno, so this kind of vocational orders. So I think that these theologians, like most of these theologians, would agree with you that the state has a very specific role in regards to social responsibility. The question is how. So how is that done? And I think Kecskés is a really interesting figure in that, because he's aware that if you give too much power for the state, it is going to be very dangerous. So he builds a whole system of different institutions, including the family, the church, the state, and also something maybe, or something like maybe you could call the civil society, but I'm not really sure of that. So those autonomous units in cooperation with each other, so not separated, they together are trying to solve the problem of social responsibility. And I think it is very important to take a note on the dangers of state power in that regards. But because if you have give great responsibilities, you may also give great powers and tools for political usage.
And let us not forget that this is the danger that the very Catholic idea of subsidiarity tries to avoid. So what you can decide, what you can arrange at the lowest level, there you should do it at the lowest level in your local community. And the state should only intervene at levels where no one else is able to intervene. So this is exactly the Catholic answer. So of course, sometimes the state is needed. As you mentioned, those medieval or early modern thinkers about economy, yes, they themselves emphasized that I wouldn't call a medieval government the state, but okay, let's say that the medieval state should intervene in certain cases in the workings of the market and so on. But there is always this warning that the state should only intervene when no one else is able to do the same.
Next question, please.
Thank you to the four of you for your contribution. I have a question to Ádám, following his definition of Christian realism. So, as far as I understand, your definition is dealing with not only philosophical level, but also faith. It's kind of a dual approach, because on the philosophical level, we usually say that dealing with the ancient philosophers, Aristotle is the realist, and he's more optimistic because he he believes, he trusts the senses, which can get to the reality, and then the ultimate reality, who is God. And on the other hand, Plato is the idealist, and he is more pessimistic because he says that the body is the prison of the soul, etc., and we have to reach the eternal things. And so this is the basic, and in a way, nobody said anything really interesting apart from them in philosophy. So you are saying that you are taking into account faith, but the question is that Hungary, as far as I know, I've been living in Hungary for 2 years now. There is a very strong idealist tradition in Hungary, so Platonistic in a way, and especially with King Matthias's golden age, and I am wondering sometimes if your realism is not, in fact, an idealism, and if I'm a little bit advocatus diaboli here, just it's a bit tricky question, but it needs to be defined because the border between idealism and realism isn't so clear in a way.
Yes, so realism and idealism, I think they are really different in philosophy, theology, political thought, and how we use in the everyday life. So I can only speak about in what sense I use these concepts, or what sense Niebuhr uses this concept. So it is predominantly a political realism. So when it's really funny because Niebuhr is not really fond of descriptions and I don't know, big systematic accounts, but he tries to define those two terms, realism and idealism. And he also argues that these are not like very accurate phrases, in a way that they rather show a disposition to a problem or a disposition to the reality. And realism in Niebuhr's thought, like in political realism, is to understand the political reality as it is. So that's a very simplistic answer, but that's the basis of that answer. So that's what I'm speaking about realism. And this is not a big thing. I mean, if political realism is to understand reality as it is. It is not a big thing. Why do we speak about it? Because many others don't understand reality as it is because they have idealist misconceptions. So in this way, you can understand idealism as in opposition to realism, and realism tries to show that idealism exists. He somehow argues that idealism is something that you imagine in your mind and you just try to follow it because that's the idea, that's the main moral idea that you try to follow. So you don't really deal with what is, but what is to be, what comes for the future, what you want from the future. And I think we can understand this also in politics. So several times the problem is that what do we want to reach? That's the first question. No, the first question for these political realists is what is now? And then from the what is now, then you can decide what you want to reach. So that's the basic difference.
We'll have time for maybe another question. I saw this question. This man was waiting for a while. Yes. Thank you.
Hello. Given the book is called Theologians on Modern Politics, did you in the book, or would you be able to comment now on the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and political Islam in Europe at this time? Thank you.
No, absolutely not. It's pretty funny. I just wanted to show how the whole idea of this structure was, that András is more into European Catholicism, I'm American. I think what you suggest is interesting in a way that many other volumes could be wrote on theologians of modern politics. So you could always use the Hungarian Protestantism, American Catholicism, and European Protestantism. But of course, we could deal with Jewish theology. We could also deal with Muslim political thought. So, but this is only on those three distinct traditions.
One last quick question. Okay, one quick question, and then we'll close the conversation.
Thank you. I was just curious how Carl Schmitt might fit into your scheme, because he wasn't a theologian, but he was certainly one of the most prominent political scientists of the 20th century. And I think he's unique because he was, of course, originally influential in Germany, but when he began to be translated in the United States in the 1980s, which continues up to the present day, he's probably the most referenced political scientist that I see, at least in academic literature, maybe not so much in theological literature. I was just curious, since he was strongly influenced by Catholicism in his thought.
We deal with two authors, Erik Peterson and Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde, and both authors was influenced by Carl Schmitt. So yes, we don't deal with explicitly Carl Schmitt, but two authors who was absolutely influenced by Carl Schmitt we deal with, and it's really interesting because what I mentioned, Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde influenced to Ratzinger, so maybe we can find something intellectual connection between Carl Schmitt and Ratzinger also. But maybe we want to make a deeper research about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to just add and then give the microphone to Tamás, because I think he's again a specialist in Schmitt and political theology. But yeah, it's not it's theologians of modern politics and non-political theologians of modern politics. Even though some of the authors can be also seen as political theologians. But as far as I know, he was not a theologian, so that's why he was missed.
Yes, and he did not consider himself a theologian, which is the most important. So, in his book Political Theology in 1922, actually he starts the topic by saying that all significant concepts of the modern theory of the state are secularized theological concepts. And he has other writings like this Neutralisierung and so on, where he actually describes the whole of Western history as a process of secularization. And he always thinks that, yes, once there was theology, then came, philosophy, moral philosophy, and then come economics. But this is a history of secularization. So he would have rejected this idea that he is a real theologian. But as one of my favorite American authors, William T. Cavanaugh, once said that, yes, Carl Schmitt was right to say that all political concepts were secularized theological concepts, if by secularized one means covert. So this is where, and this is what I agree with. That yes, so Bill Cavanaugh was right to say that Schmitt was partially wrong. So he saw those analogies between secular ideologies and mainly Christian theology, but he missed the fact that this analogy was so close and so systematic that it actually makes these systems, liberalism, socialism, and so on, themselves theological systems. But this is not what Carl Schmitt said. This is how we today interpret Carl Schmitt.
All right, it is time to bring this conversation to a close. So I would like to extend my warmest thanks to the Danube Institute for making this event possible. I thank you very much to you, the three speakers, for their enriching and very stimulating reflections. And again, thank you all for being here today. It was a very, very good conversation. And, in these days, in these times of rampant defeatism, I would like, in wishing you a pleasant evening, to just remind you some words that Cardinal Peter Erde told me recently in an interview, saying, tomorrow's Christianity can be us, European, if we want it to be. And, I think it's a good way of saying goodbye and, leaving you with these thoughts. I think it provides some very good food for thoughts. Again, a very pleasant evening to you all, and thank you again. Bye.